Please, somebody, open the door." The voice was barely more than a breath against the roar of the wind, yet it cut through the walls of the cabin like a splinter of ice. Noah Beckett froze mid-motion, the heavy log in his hands hovering over the firewood pile. Outside, the January storm howled across the Oregon ridges, rattling the windows and seeping frost into every crack. Nobody came this far out after dark. Nobody knocked. He set the log down slowly, his senses tightening. For years he'd lived by patterns: chop wood, boil water, put his daughter to bed, guard the silence. Patterns meant safety. Tonight the pattern had broken. The knock came again, harder, trembling. "Please." Noah's gaze flicked toward the corner of the cabin. 8-year-old Sophie sat cross-legged on the rug, her book of fairy tales open on her lap. Her small fingers clutched the carved wooden horse he'd made her last winter, knuckles white. "Daddy." Her voice was a whisper, lost in the wind. "Stay there," he said quietly. His voice was low but steady, the same tone he used when the generator failed or when the deer came too close to the fence. Sophie nodded, eyes wide. Noah crossed to the door boots, silent on the worn planks. He pulled the latch, the iron cold against his skin. The moment he cracked the door open, a rush of snow burst inward, stinging his face, and with it came a figure small at first, then collapsing forward into his arms. He caught her reflexively. She was ice-cold and heavier than she looked, her hair plastered with snow, her coat torn. He could feel the tremor of exhaustion running through her body the way a wire hums just before it snaps. I couldn't." Her words broke off as her knees gave way. Noah tightened his grip, his instinct taking over. "Easy now. You're safe." He didn't ask who she was, not yet. In weather like this, names came second to warmth. He shut the door with his boot, sealing out the blizzard. The wind roared against the wood like a living thing, but inside the cabin the fire glowed gold and steady. Sophie had risen to her knees, her eyes fixed on the stranger. "Daddy, is she? She's alive," Noah said. "Blanket. Now." Sophie ran to fetch the quilt from her bed. Noah lowered the woman onto the wide bench near the hearth, his movements precise but gentle. He'd lifted logs heavier than this, but there was something different about holding a person the way their weight carried their whole story. The woman's lips were pale, her breath shallow. "Please. They'll find me," she murmured. "Hush." Noah draped the quilt over her shoulders, tucking it close. "You're safe here tonight. That's all you need to know." For a moment, the only sounds were the hiss of snow at the windows and the crackle of fire. Sophie held the quilt tighter around the woman, her small fingers careful as she would be with a wounded bird. The stranger blinked up at them, disoriented, her eyes dark with fear and something deeper, shame maybe, or grief. I can't stay," she whispered. Her voice had the edge of someone who was used to giving orders, but now it trembled like glass. "I just needed a place to—" She swallowed hard. "I should go." "You won't make it 50 feet in that storm," Noah said quietly. "Sit. Breathe. We'll figure the rest out when the snow stops." Her gaze flicked up at him then, as if weighing his words. For a heartbeat, her eyes sharpened, recognition flickering but not landing. She looked away quickly. Daddy, Sophie said softly, "Her hands are blue." Noah crouched down, his broad shoulders blocking the draft. He took the woman's hands, gently rubbing them between his palms to coax back the warmth. They were cold as river stones. He noticed the torn edge of her expensive coat, the scuffed boots that weren't meant for mountain roads. A city woman lost in a wilderness storm. "You've been out there long?" he asked. She hesitated, then gave a small broken laugh. "Long enough to forget what warm feels like." "Not anymore," Noah said. "You're here now." He poured hot water from the kettle into a mug and held it to her lips. She drank, eyes closing, as steam rose against her face. The cabin's glow softened her features, revealing a striking beauty, dulled by exhaustion, cheekbones smudged with ash and snow, a mouth cut from years of holding back words. "What's your name?" Sophie asked shyly. The woman opened her eyes, and for a heartbeat they glistened with something unspoken. "Eve," she said at last, then corrected herself. "Evelyn." Sophie nodded solemnly. "I'm Sophie." Evelyn managed a small tired smile. "Hello, Sophie." Noah watched the exchange in silence. His mind was cataloging details, the tremor in Evelyn's voice, the way her gaze darted to the windows, the raw desperation of her arrival. This wasn't just someone lost in a storm. This was someone running. "You're safe," he said again, but softer now, like a promise rather than a warning. Evelyn's hands tightened around the mug. She studied him then, her brow furrowing slightly. "Do I know you?" Noah held her gaze for a moment. The firelight caught the lines around his eyes, the quiet weight of years. "Doesn't matter right now," he said. "Storm's bad. That's enough." She flinched as another gust slammed against the door. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If they find me, they won't tonight." His tone left no room for argument. Sophie sat back on her heels, watching them both with the solemnity only children could hold. "Daddy always says the snow keeps secrets," she offered softly. "He says storms make people invisible." Evelyn looked at the child as though the words were a lifeline. Her shoulders sagged under the quilt. For the first time since she'd stumbled inside, she stopped trying to rise. Noah straightened, moving to the window. Outside was a white void, the pines bending under the wind, the sky a swirl of ash and glass. He knew this land like his own heartbeat. Nothing moved without him sensing it. If someone was following her, the storm had bought them a few hours. Behind him, Evelyn's voice was quieter now. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know who I am." Noah's back remained to her, his hands braced against the cold glass. "Storm's no place for a person to die," he said simply. She closed her eyes at that, the line of her mouth softening. Sophie tucked the quilt higher around her shoulders and whispered, "It's okay. Daddy always keeps people safe." Noah turned at last. In the firelight, the three of them formed a tableau: the rugged man, the wary woman, the child clutching her wooden horse. Outside, the world was a storm without end. Inside, a fragile warmth had begun to take hold. He pulled another blanket from the cedar chest and draped it over Evelyn's knees. "Rest," he said. "We'll talk when the sun's up." Her gaze followed him as he moved back to the fire, feeding it with practiced hands. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then stopped. The flames reflected in her eyes, flickering like a memory she couldn't name. Sophie crawled closer to her father, leaning against his leg. "Daddy," she whispered. "Will she stay?" "For tonight," he said. His voice was low but steady, the sound of a man who built his life on endurance rather than chance. And though no one spoke it aloud, all three of them felt the same truth settle over the room with the falling snow. The knock at the door had changed everything. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls. Inside, the fire burned on. The smell of cedar and cinnamon was the first thing Evelyn noticed when her eyes fluttered open. It wrapped around her like a thread pulled from a memory long, buried warm kitchens, safe winters, a world before everything cracked. The ceiling above her was made of exposed timber beams darkened with age. Light flickered along them, firelight, soft and pulsing. She blinked slowly, her head pounding with a dull throb that stretched behind her eyes. Then came the awareness of weight blankets piled atop her, the slow ache of cold thawing from her bones. Her breath caught her chest, rising too fast. Where was she? She sat up sharply, and pain bloomed through her side like a knife. Ah! A creak of the floorboards. She turned quickly, her pulse hammering. A man stood near the fireplace, quietly pouring hot water from a kettle into a mug. He didn't startle. He didn't rush. "You're awake," he said calmly without turning around. His voice, low, rough like stones against a river current. "What is this?" she asked, throat raw. "Cabin," he answered, simply handing her the mug. Storm came fast. You were almost unconscious. She looked at him now, really looked. Tall, broad shoulders, face lined from years of hard seasons. He wasn't young, but there was something enduring about him like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. "I shouldn't be here," she said, clutching the mug though her hands trembled. "I didn't mean to." "You knocked." He shrugged. "Didn't ask questions, but I can't stay." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. I understand enough." He gestured toward the window. "You step outside now and you'll be part of the forest by morning." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her pride, her instinct to control the narrative, wrestled with the truth outside those frost-covered panes. And lost. "I need to call someone. I need to—" She looked around frantically. "Do you have a phone?" "No service up here. Closest signal's 15 miles south if the lines aren't iced." Of course it would be. She had fled too far too fast, thinking only of escape. No plan, no backup, no allies. "I shouldn't have come this far," she muttered more to herself than to him. A small voice broke the silence. "You came to the right place." Evelyn turned her head. A little girl, maybe 8, stood in the doorway between 2 rooms wearing flannel pajamas and mismatched socks. Her eyes were wide and curious, her hair in a messy braid. She held a worn stuffed rabbit in one hand and a book in the other. Evelyn blinked, stunned. "I didn't know you had a child. Didn't get the chance to mention it," the man said quietly. "Sophie, this is Evelyn. She'll be staying till the storm passes." The girl nodded, solemnly walking toward her with quiet, steady steps. "You looked like a snow angel last night." "But kind of a broken one." Evelyn let out a startled laugh and then, just as suddenly, felt the sting of tears. She hadn't meant to cry. Not in front of strangers. But something about the child's simple honesty cracked her walls wide open. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered. Sophie shrugged. "Daddy says we help people when they fall. That's what makes us human." Evelyn looked at the man. He said nothing, just moved to the hearth and stoked the fire. She studied him more closely now, something tugging at the edge of her mind. There was something about the slope of his jaw, the quiet way he carried himself. Familiar, but from where? "You didn't tell me your name," she said cautiously. He didn't look at her. "Didn't think you'd remember." That stopped her cold. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "What does that mean?" He turned then, eyes meeting hers for the first time. Gray, unreadable with a flicker of something just beneath the surface. Not anger, not even pain. Something deeper. "You signed a termination letter 5 years ago," he said evenly. "My name was on it." The room tilted just slightly. Her breath caught. "You were at Rentec." "Maintenance division," he replied. "Name's Noah Beckett." The mug nearly slipped from her hands. She stared at him, words failing. It had been a Tuesday. Her assistant had brought in a stack of pink slips. Restructuring, they said. Budget cuts. Efficiency. She hadn't even looked at most of the names. I didn't know." She managed voice, barely a whisper. He offered no reaction. Just went back to stirring the soup simmering on the stove. Sophie sat cross-legged near the fire, flipping through her book as though this was the most natural conversation in the world. Evelyn swallowed hard. "You must think I deserve this." He paused, then slowly shook his head. "Storms don't come to punish people. They just come." She didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't condemnation either. "Why help me?" she asked. Noah stirred the soup once more, then set the ladle down. "Because leaving someone outside in a storm, that's not who I am." His words landed like a stone in her chest. Sophie got up and padded over to Evelyn. "You can sit by the fire if you want," she said. "It's warmer than over there." Evelyn hesitated, then stood unsteady but upright and crossed to the fireside. She sat beside the little girl, the heat soaking into her bones. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that meant something was mending. Noah ladled soup into bowls, handed one to Sophie, then offered one to Evelyn. She accepted it carefully. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he replied simply. "You need rest. We'll figure out what comes next tomorrow." Evelyn looked into the fire, the orange glow catching in her eyes. "I don't know what's coming next." "Then you're free," he said. "Nothing left to lose is another word for beginning." Her throat tightened. She didn't know this man, not really. But for the first time in days, maybe weeks, she felt like she could breathe. Just a little. And somehow, that was enough. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin morning arrived gently quiet and golden, filtering through frost-laced windows like a secret the mountain had decided to keep. Evelyn sat in the wooden armchair by the fire, wrapped in one of Sophie's flannel blankets, her fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug filled with something warm and sweet. Her body still ached. Her head throbbed faintly, but she was awake. Aware. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was falling. Across the room, Noah was mending something at the kitchen table, an old lamp maybe, or a radio. His movements were precise, methodical. He didn't hum, didn't speak, just worked in steady silence like a man who had made peace with the quiet. Sophie knelt on the rug nearby, drawing carefully with a dull pencil on the back of a grocery receipt. She looked up at Evelyn with those wide, solemn eyes that seemed to see far more than any child should. "Do you want to see?" she asked. Evelyn blinked. "See what, my drawing? It's of you." Evelyn smiled, surprised. "Of me?" Sophie nodded and turned the paper around. On it, stick figures stood under a flurry of pencil-drawn snow. One figure lay curled near a door. Another, a tall one, stood nearby, arms outstretched. A little girl stood between them, smiling. Evelyn's throat tightened. "You drew last night." Sophie nodded again. "You looked like one of those fairies from the books. Except sad." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. The truth was, she had felt more like a ghost than a fairy when she stumbled through that snow. And yet here was this child, this bright little flame in the middle of the blizzard who had made her into something almost magical. She reached out gently, smoothing Sophie's hair. "Thank you. That's the first kind thing someone said to me in a long time." Sophie leaned her cheek into Evelyn's hand and said very seriously, "That's not okay." Evelyn froze. "Even fairies get tired," Sophie continued. "But they're not supposed to feel alone." Noah looked up at that, his eyes catching Evelyn's. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Not pity, not judgment, just quiet understanding. Evelyn looked down quickly. She wasn't ready for what she saw in his gaze. Sophie turned back to her drawing, humming softly. Evelyn sipped her drink and let herself study the man at the table. The name Noah Beckett still echoed in her head. She hadn't remembered it last night, not fully. But now, in the calm of daylight, it came back in flashes. 5 years ago. A restructure. Department cuts. She'd signed the forms after a finance meeting, dozens of them. She hadn't read most of the names. Hadn't looked beyond the line position facilities support, action termination. And yet, here he was. He didn't look broken. He looked anchored. The guilt sat like a stone in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said, finally breaking the silence. Noah didn't look up from the circuit board in his hands. "For what? For what happened? Back then. I didn't know you." "You didn't need to," he said simply. She flinched at that, not because his words were cruel, but because they weren't. He wasn't angry. He was just stating fact, and somehow that hurt more. "I thought I was building something important," she said quietly. "Rentec was everything to me. My name, my vision, my fight." Noah finally looked up. "And when the fight turned on you." Her breath hitched. "That's why you ran," he added. Evelyn didn't answer. Didn't need to. The truth was all over her face. She stared into her cup. They turned so fast. People I mentored, trusted. They smiled while they locked me out of my own servers. Sophie looked up from her drawing. That's like a betrayal story, right? Evelyn gave a hollow laugh. Yeah, something like that. Sophie's brow furrowed. My teacher says when someone breaks a promise, you're supposed to say how it made you feel. And then, you make a boundary. Evelyn looked at her stunned. Noah raised an eyebrow. Miss Terry strikes again. She's very smart, Sophie said proudly. Evelyn smiled. I think I needed to hear that. There was a pause. Then Sophie, with childlike boldness, scooted closer and said, Do you think, maybe, you could stay longer? Evelyn blinked. Stay, just for a little while, until the storm stops. Or maybe after. Sophie hesitated. We haven't had anyone else here since Mama left. The room fell still. Noah's hands paused mid-motion. He didn't look up, but his jaw tightened. Evelyn looked between them, her breath catching. I didn't know. It's okay, Sophie said. It's been 2 years. Daddy says some people leave quietly because they're hurting too loud. Evelyn swallowed against the sudden lump in her throat. She looked at Noah. He was staring into the distance now, hands resting on the disassembled radio. I'm sorry, she said softly. Noah nodded once, almost imperceptibly. She wasn't a bad person, he said. Just lost. And sometimes when people break, they don't leave pieces behind. Just silence. The words landed heavy. Evelyn breathed in slowly, her heart aching in a way she hadn't expected. Noah stood and moved to the kitchen. I'm heading out to check the generator. Storm knocked it off overnight. If the heat drops, there's a backup heater by the pantry. Sophie jumped up. Can I come boots and coat? He said with a slight smile. She scampered off. Noah looked at Evelyn. You should rest. You're not done thawing yet. She nodded. Thank you. For everything. He paused. Most people walk away when the storm hits. You didn't. I didn't have anywhere left to walk to, she said quietly. He nodded again and stepped outside. Evelyn turned back to the fire. Sophie's drawing lay nearby, still unfinished. She reached for the pencil, added one tiny detail, a heart drawn between the 3 figures. She smiled. For the first time in a long while, it felt real. The storm had softened by afternoon trading, howling winds for a steady hush. Snow still fell in thick, silent flakes outside the cabin window, blanketing the pines and making the world feel like it had stopped breathing. Inside, the air was warm, but tension simmered beneath the quiet. Evelyn stood at the kitchen counter, her fingers tracing the rim of a clean mug. She wasn't cold anymore, not physically, but something deeper remained frozen, buried under layers she had spent years building. Noah worked near the back door, his boots and coat dusted with snow steam rising off him like smoke. He had just returned from checking the generator and repairing a loose coil in the shed. Sophie trailed behind him, proudly holding a small bag of screws like treasure. We saved the day, she declared, climbing onto the stool beside the counter. Well, mostly Daddy. I just held the flashlight. Noah shot her a look. A steady flashlight is half the battle. Sophie beamed. Evelyn managed a smile, but it faded quickly. Her gaze fell to the floor. I should tell you why I'm here, she said finally. Noah glanced over his shoulder but said nothing. He just kept removing his gloves, slow and methodical. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the mug. I didn't come here on purpose, she began. I didn't know this cabin was yours. I didn't know. It was you. Noah nodded once quietly. I wasn't running from the storm, she added. I was running from people. Sophie tilted her head. Bad guys. Evelyn hesitated. Not in the way you think. People who wore suits. Smiled in boardrooms. Called me family until they didn't. She looked down at Sophie, but her words were for Noah. They called an emergency meeting. Said they found discrepancies, accused me of hiding funds, misusing company accounts. I built that company from nothing. I bled for it. Her voice broke sharp and bitter. They froze my accounts. Shut down my access. Even my assistant, someone I mentored for 6 years, handed me a legal letter instead of a phone. Noah watched her, his expression unreadable. "You ever feel the ground disappear under you?" Evelyn asked, her voice quieter now. "Like everything you thought was yours was borrowed?" "Yes," Noah said. "Just that." She looked up, startled by the clarity in his tone. "I know what it's like to be erased," he added. "To walk out one day thinking you matter, and find out you don't." Sophie said softly, "That's when Daddy stopped wearing ties." Evelyn let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Almost." "I didn't even pack a bag," she continued. "I just drove, through the night. I thought, if I could just get away long enough, maybe I'd remember who I was before all of it." Noah leaned against the doorway. "And did you?" She looked at him. Not yet. Silence again. Not empty, but weighty, like something healing in the bones. Sophie kicked her legs lightly under the stool. "Can I show her the attic later?" Noah raised an eyebrow. "Why, that's where you put the Christmas lights. And the memory box." Noah hesitated, then gave a small nod. "If she wants." Evelyn blinked. "What's in the memory box?" Sophie smiled. "Everything worth keeping." The words landed deeper than they should have. Evelyn looked down into her mug. The silence stretched. Then, "Do you think I could stay a little longer?" Noah didn't respond right away. He moved to the stove, poured hot water into another mug, then walked over and set it gently in front of her. She met his eyes. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said. "Storm hasn't passed yet." She looked at him for a long moment, and when it does, his jaw tightened slightly. "We'll see." There was something comforting about the way he didn't promise what he couldn't guarantee. No soft reassurances, no false hope, just space, just now. "I always thought strength meant standing alone," she said quietly. "Turns out it just makes the fall longer." Noah sat across from her, elbows resting on the worn wood table. "People think strength is loud," he said, "but sometimes it's just choosing not to give up, even when no one's watching." Sophie added, "Daddy says quiet people move mountains. You just don't hear them coming." Evelyn smiled at her. "Your dad's a wise man." Sophie shrugged. "He reads a lot." They ate together that night. Something simple, rice and beans with smoked salt and a splash of lemon. Evelyn offered to help, and Sophie taught her how to stir without squishing the grains. Laughter echoed in the cabin for the first time since she arrived. After dinner, Sophie dozed off beside the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of pine and lavender. Evelyn sat nearby, staring into the flames. "She called me Snow Princess," Evelyn said softly. "That first night. Did she tell you?" Noah nodded. "She sees stories in everyone. I used to feel like one," she whispered, "before I forgot how to be soft." He didn't answer. She turned to him. "Do you think it's too late to start over?" Noah looked into the fire. "Depends what you're carrying. I used to carry a company. Now I carry shame." He turned to her finally. "Then maybe it's time to trade that in. Carry something worth holding." She didn't reply, but her eyes filled. When she rose to go to bed, she paused at the hallway. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the shelter, for the silence. It's been louder than most of the noise I lived in." He nodded once. "Good night, Evelyn." She lingered a second longer. "No one said my name like that in a while. Like it still means something." Noah didn't move. Names don't stop meaning. People just stop listening. She disappeared down the hallway and the fire cracked softly behind her. Noah stared into the flames alone once more. But something in the air had shifted, and he knew storms like this never came without changing something forever. The snow finally stopped. By the time morning pushed its soft light through the windows, the world outside had turned still, blanketed in silence. No wind, no movement, just a heavy hush that settled into every crack like an exhale after a long, hard cry. Evelyn stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She watched the white ridges of the forest stretch into the horizon, unbroken and endless. The storm had passed, but the weight in her chest had not. Behind her, Noah moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency. He wasn't loud, wasn't performative. Just present. Just consistent. She found herself stealing glances more than she meant to. "I can help," she said suddenly, setting her mug down. He looked over. "With breakfast, cleaning, shoveling snow. Whatever you need, you're recovering." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not glass, just temporarily dented." A flicker of something humor, maybe, crossed his face. Noah stepped aside and gestured to the counter. "The eggs are real. The pancakes are not. Sophie likes them shaped like animals. I make blobs. She calls them bears." Evelyn smirked. "I can do better than blobs." "You say that now." He handed her a mixing bowl. They moved around the kitchen like a pair that had done it 100 times, though it was their first. There was no music playing yet. There was rhythm. She cracked eggs. He flipped pancakes. At one point, they reached for the same mug and their fingers brushed. Neither said a word, but neither pulled away too quickly either. Sophie bounced into the kitchen just in time to declare, "That pancake looks like a sleeping moose." Evelyn smiled. "Better than my first attempt. That one looked like Texas." After breakfast, they all bundled into layers and headed outside. The snow was knee-deep light and powdery, blanketing the woodpile and half burying the generator. Evelyn grabbed a shovel before Noah could stop her. "Careful," he said, not unkindly. "The snow hides the ice underneath. I spent 5 years in heels. I think I can handle snow." She slipped exactly 10 seconds later. Noah didn't laugh, just extended a hand. She stared at it for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, warm, reliable. "You always this stubborn?" he asked, pulling her up. She dusted herself off. "I ran a billion-dollar company." Stubborn comes with the title. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You'll get it back." She looked at him surprised. "You think so? I think truth takes longer than lies." "But it always shows up." Her breath caught. They finished the shoveling side by side, wordless but not silent. When they returned to the cabin, their clothes damp with melted snow and their cheeks flushed, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time, earned warmth. Later that afternoon, Noah sat at the small desk near the back wall, fingers moving across an old keyboard wired into a monitor that looked like it hadn't seen civilization in years. Evelyn wandered over curious. "What are you working on?" "Router's been flaky. I'm rerouting through a backup node old satellite line I reprogrammed." She blinked. "You built a satellite uplink." He nodded without looking up. "Modified one. Used to do a lot of system redundancy back in the day." A pause. "You were in IT close," he said. "Systems engineering." Evelyn's stomach dropped. What company she asked, though she already knew. Noah paused, then looked up at her. "Rentec," he said evenly. "First 5 years. Infrastructure and architecture." The words hit her like a wave of cold. She started, then stopped. "It's fine," he said. "That's not what this is about." "But it matters," she insisted. "You weren't some janitor who landed here by accident. You helped build the very foundation. And I got cut from it just the same," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "Not because I failed, but because someone needed a fall guy." She looked away, shame knotting in her chest. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I should have. I should have seen. You were fighting your own battles." She turned back to him. "You never fought back." He stared at the screen. "Fighting doesn't always fix what's already been decided. So I walked away. Took the only thing that still mattered with me." Her eyes softened. "Sophie." He nodded. Evelyn took a breath. "I want to try again. I want to make it right." Noah looked at her. Really looked. "Then start with what you can still change." That night, Evelyn sat by the fire while Sophie colored on the rug. Noah was outside stacking wood. She stared into the flames, thinking of the choices that had led her here. When Noah came back in, she stood. "I need to get back into the system," she said. He looked at her. "I can't sit here waiting for justice to fall from the sky. I need to fight, with proof. I need to find what they buried and bring it to light." He nodded once. "Okay," she blinked. "You'll help." "You're not the only one who wants the truth out," he said. "I know where the bodies are buried, because I helped dig the foundations." There was something dangerous in his calm. Not reckless, just focused. But he added, "You'll have to be careful. If they're watching, any misstep could tip them off." Evelyn sat back down, her mind already whirring. "Then we'll do it quietly. From here." Noah pulled up a chair beside her. "For what it's worth, he said you're not who you were 5 years ago." She looked at him. "No. No," he said. "She wouldn't have shown up in the snow." Her chest tightened. "People say storms are destructive," he continued, "but sometimes they wash away what we shouldn't have been holding on to in the first place." Evelyn swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "You think I can become someone better?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I think you already have." And for the first time she believed it might be true. The kettle whistled sharp against the hush of early morning. Evelyn sat on the edge of the cabin's small porch, bundled in a flannel blanket, a mug of coffee warming her hands. The snow had turned to crust, crunching underfoot whenever Sophie darted around chasing flakes that still danced from the sky like hesitant ghosts. But something about the air felt off. Noah stepped out beside her, pulling his jacket tighter. "You've been quiet." She looked up, hesitating. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching?" He didn't smile. "I do. Right now." She raised an eyebrow. He nodded toward the woods. "Something's wrong." Before she could respond, Sophie came bounding around the corner of the cabin, her face lit with excitement. "There are boot prints near the back fence. Big ones." Noah's entire body stiffened. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "Yeah, I counted them. They go up to the satellite dish and then back toward the trees." Evelyn stood, heart climbing into her throat. "Noah, take her inside," he said. "Noah." His voice left no room for argument. "Now." Evelyn nodded and led Sophie in with a forced calmness that betrayed the thunder pounding in her chest. Noah walked the perimeter with practiced, calculated steps. He didn't need a weapon to know something had shifted. The satellite dish had fresh snow disturbed at its base. Tracks heavy, deliberate. Someone had been here. Not a hiker, not a mistake. Targeted. Inside, Evelyn paced. Sophie colored at the table, oblivious. "Are we in danger?" she whispered as Noah stepped back in. Someone was here, watching. They didn't come close, but they wanted to get a fix on the signal. She frowned. "You said this system was secure." It was, until someone got lucky or until someone started looking really hard. A beat passed. "My smartwatch," she whispered. "It tracks GPS." I didn't think. Noah cursed softly and walked over to the old desk. He pulled out tools she didn't recognize and began dismantling the satellite routing hardware like a surgeon in crisis mode. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Masking our location, rerouting traffic through 4 abandoned uplinks. It won't stop someone with high-level access, but it'll slow them down. How long do we have?" He didn't look at her. "Hard to say. If they think you're alive and nearby, they'll send someone." Evelyn's breath hitched. "They think I'm a threat. They know you are." She folded her arms, not against the cold but the panic creeping up her spine. "Why didn't I see this coming? All those board meetings, all those smiles." "Because you were trying to build something good," Noah said calmly. "People who build don't always look over their shoulder. People who destroy do." She looked at him. "Are you scared?" His hands didn't stop moving. No, just alert. Another beat. Then softly, I don't care what they try. They're not getting near Sophie. Or you. Those words hit harder than any threat could. Not because they were grand, but because they were quiet. Certain. Not said for effect, but for promise. They're not getting near you. A moment of silence stretched between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, just real. Then Noah stood, flipped a switch, and watched the monitor pulse with soft blue light. "We're invisible again," he said. "For how long? As long as we need." That night, Evelyn sat by Sophie's bed as the little girl drifted into sleep, her arms curled around a stuffed rabbit that looked as worn as the wooden floorboards. "She's strong," Evelyn whispered. "She's all I've got," Noah replied from the doorway. Evelyn turned. "Not true," she said. "She has me now, too." Noah didn't move for a moment. Then he nodded once. Later by the fire, Evelyn finally asked the question that had been hanging between them since the moment the boot prints were found. "Why are you helping me?" He stared into the flames. "Because no one helped me," he said. And there it was, the truth that cut deeper than any knife. "You could have turned me away, left me in the snow. No one would have blamed you." He looked at her. "I didn't bring you in because you were Evelyn Wren." "Then why?" "Because you knocked." She blinked. "That simple." He nodded. "People make things complicated to justify leaving others behind. I don't." She swallowed, her voice suddenly fragile. "I don't know if I deserve this. You don't have to. Just don't waste it." The logs shifted in the fireplace, sending a soft crackle into the room. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter and looked at him. Really looked. "You're not just a janitor. You're not just a father. You're the kind of man the world pretends doesn't exist anymore." Noah didn't react, just leaned back in the worn armchair and whispered, "Maybe the world forgot." But I didn't. And Evelyn, for the first time in months, didn't feel like a failure or a fraud or a fugitive. She felt safe. But somewhere out there, someone was coming. The silence of the storm had passed, and the next knock on the door might not be one asking for help. The wind howled again that night, not like before when the storm was a natural force, but like it was trying to whisper a warning through the cracks in the cabin walls. Noah didn't sleep. Neither did Evelyn. Sophie was curled up in her makeshift bed in the loft, a mountain of blankets shielding her from the world. But Evelyn lay on the couch downstairs, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as the fire cracked low. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Noah moved silently through the shadows. Every window was checked. Every entry locked, reinforced, and shielded. The satellite dish had been unplugged. GPS scrambled. But something about the silence outside didn't feel like peace. It felt like pause. A waiting breath before a scream. Then a creak. Not from the cabin, from the porch. Noah's body tensed, every instinct roaring awake. Another step. Snow being crushed under boots. Deliberate. Evelyn sat upright. Noah. He held up a hand, motioning her to stay. And then glass shattered. A window near the back exploded, inward shards scattering like ice daggers across the floor. Noah lunged. A figure in dark tactical gear dove through the gap, landing hard, but not hard enough to stop him. Evelyn gasped. Upstairs. Now he barked, already moving. The intruder raised a weapon non-lethal but meant to stun. Evelyn froze, but Noah moved like a ghost through smoke. In 3 steps, he reached the man, grabbed the arm holding the weapon, and twisted hard. Bone cracked. The gun dropped with a thud. Noah spun behind him, used the man's weight against him, and slammed him into the kitchen island. The wood cracked. The man tried to reach for something at his belt, but Noah was faster. A punch, then a knee. Then the man collapsed, groaning. Breathing hard, Noah kicked the weapon away and bound the man's wrists with a cord from the firewood bundle. By the time Evelyn could move again, it was over. Silence returned, but this time it was shaken, broken. Sophie peeked from the stairs, eyes wide. "Daddy!" Noah turned, softened instantly. "It's okay, sweetheart. He's not going to hurt anyone." Evelyn sank to her knees near the fireplace, adrenaline finally crashing into her. Her hands trembled. She looked at the man crumpled on the floor. His coat had no logo, no ID. Professional. "Who is he?" she asked. Noah checked the man's neck, then his eyes. "Trained. Paid to extract, not kill. But if you'd run, he'd have dragged you into the dark." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "This is my fault." "No," he said firmly. "This is theirs." She looked at him. Really looked. There was blood on his knuckles, a cut on his cheekbone. His chest rose and fell with quiet rage, but in his eyes there was calm. "Why aren't you panicking?" she whispered. "Because I've lived this before." She blinked. Before, he said nothing. Instead, he knelt beside Sophie, brushing her hair back. "Hey, you okay?" She nodded slowly. Was he trying to take her? Noah didn't answer, but Evelyn did. "Yes, baby, he was." Sophie's lower lip trembled, but Daddy stopped him. Evelyn's voice cracked. "Yes, he did." That night, after the intruder was secured in the woodshed, gagged, tied, and stripped of all tech, Noah sat on the porch steps. Evelyn joined him, her blanket wrapped tight. "You didn't hesitate," she said. "I've learned not to." She exhaled. "I've spent most of my life making speeches about courage, and tonight I realized I never had it." He looked at her. Courage isn't in speeches. It's in silence, in staying, in standing. She turned to him, her eyes heavy with gratitude and something deeper. "I need to know something," she said. He waited. "If you hadn't been here, if I'd shown up at some stranger's cabin instead, what would have happened tonight?" He didn't blink. "You'd be gone. Or worse." A long pause. The snow fell softly now, like a curtain coming down after a violent act. "I never even said thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to." "I do," she insisted, "because no one's ever fought for me like that. Not my board, not my friends, not even my own father. But you didn't even hesitate." Noah looked out at the woods. "You were on my doorstep, cold, hurt, alone." He turned to her, eyes steady. "No one knocks like that unless they've lost everything." She stared at him, heart tight in her chest. "You think I deserve saving?" He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "I think everyone deserves one moment where they're not alone." Tears slipped down her cheek, but she let them fall. Not out of weakness, but release. And in that moment, Evelyn Wren, former CEO, former powerhouse, former woman, who had everything realized, the only thing she had never learned how to accept was kindness. And now it was the only thing keeping her alive. The next morning brought a fragile stillness. Outside, the snow had softened into a powdery white sheet, untouched and pure, almost as if the night before hadn't happened. But inside the cabin, the air was different. Something unspoken now sat between Evelyn and Noah. Not tension, not fear, recognition. Evelyn stood by the window arms wrapped around herself, staring at the woodshed where their intruder was still bound and unconscious. Her mind swirled with a dozen unanswered questions. Who had sent him? How close had she come to disappearing without a trace? And most of all, who exactly was the man sipping coffee behind her? She turned. Noah was seated at the table reading an old paperback with the kind of casual calm that didn't belong to a janitor. Not after what he'd done last night. She cleared her throat. "You ever going to tell me who you really are?" He didn't look up. "I'm the man who fixed your busted heater and made you tea when your hands wouldn't stop shaking. That's who I am today." "Don't do that," she said, walking closer. "Don't hide behind the quiet. You fought like someone who's trained. You moved like someone who's dangerous." Now he looked up, eyes calm. "Dangerous people aren't the ones who scare me. It's the ones who look the other way." Her breath caught. She pulled out a chair across from him, lowered herself slowly. Sophie said something about rockets. A pause. She said you used to build them, before people lied. He looked down at the mug in his hands. Evelyn pressed. That's not janitor talk, Noah. He sighed. No, it's not. The cabin seemed to grow quieter as he finally spoke. I used to work at Solaritech, back when it was just a warehouse and a dream. Before the IPO, before the yachts, before the scandals. I wasn't a janitor back then. I was the CTO, co-founder. Evelyn blinked. That's impossible. It's not, he said, voice steady. I designed the architecture of your neural grid. I helped hire the first 10 engineers. I was in the room when we signed the first DARPA contract, and I was the one who flagged the financial discrepancies no one wanted to hear about. Her lips parted. You were on the founding board. Until I wasn't. He leaned back, eyes distant now. When I uncovered the first red flag offshore accounts funneling of R&D funds, they said I was paranoid, that I was slowing down the momentum. So they voted. Quietly. You weren't even there. They ousted me. NDA. Severance. Disgraced. Evelyn felt the weight of it crush against her chest. I never knew, she whispered. I don't blame you, Noah said. You had fires to put out. Press to face, a company to grow. I should have asked questions. He met her gaze. You shouldn't have had to. Silence stretched between them. And then Evelyn asked the one question that had haunted her since the moment she collapsed at his door. Why are you still here? Noah stared at her for a moment, then said quietly, because revenge is noisy, but redemption is quiet. Her eyes filled. You stayed in the same company that ruined your name, mopping their floors, smiling in silence. Why? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded, slightly worn document. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. It was an article, dated 5 years ago. Headline, Single Father Fights for Custody. After tech scandal fallout, her heart sank. They tried to paint me as unstable, he said softly. Said I was erratic. A risk to my daughter. But the judge gave me a choice, prove stability. Income. Time. He looked toward the loft where Sophie was playing with her colored pencils. So, I took the job. The only one no one would question. No press, no cameras, just floors, and a steady paycheck. I became invisible, and that invisibility kept her safe. Evelyn's voice broke. You gave up everything. No, he said, eyes never leaving his daughter's. I traded everything. For her. She swallowed hard. And me. What did you think when you saw me on that porch? He looked at her for a long time. I saw a woman who once stood on top of the world, he said. But that night, I saw a woman who just needed someone to open a door. Tears traced down Evelyn's cheeks, slow and unhidden. I was so wrong about you, she said. He smiled faintly. You weren't alone. Noah, she said, reaching across the table, if there's any part of you still angry, any part that wants to walk away, say it now. I deserve it. He shook his head. I didn't stay because of anger, he said. I stayed because someone needed me. And I've learned the hard way when you get a second chance to do the right thing. You take it. She looked down at the document again, her thumb brushing the edge. You never belonged with a mop. He chuckled softly. Maybe not. But you learn a lot from the floor, especially who's worth getting back up for. For a long time, she just looked at him, really looked. Past the calloused hands and quiet voice, past the past, and what she saw wasn't a man broken. It was a man rebuilt. A man who didn't need credit or title. A man who had chosen silence over spotlight and still stood taller than anyone she'd ever met. In that moment, Evelyn knew something she hadn't known even when she'd owned the world. She had never understood strength. Not until now. The morning after Noah revealed his past, something shifted between them. There were no grand declarations, no promises, just a quiet rhythm that settled in like two instruments finally playing in tune after years of discord. Noah was by the woodpile chopping firewood with clean, precise swings. Evelyn sat by the small desk near the window, her laptop open signal barely catching through the satellite relay Noah had jerry-rigged the night before. The air inside the cabin crackled not from the fire but from something else. Purpose. She turned to him. "I need to get into the company's internal server." Noah didn't stop swinging. "That'll trigger their intrusion detection system. I know," she said, "but I don't need the whole vault, just the audit logs. And board meeting transcripts. There's a pattern they've been manipulating numbers quarter by quarter, driving down stock value just enough before rebuying through shell firms." Noah nodded slowly. Classic pump and dump. But proving it without metadata won't hold. I have names, timestamps. I just don't have the evidence. Yet. He lowered the axe, walked over, and leaned over her screen. "Give me 3 hours." She blinked. 3. He smirked faintly. "I built the architecture, remember? I know where the shadows fall." And just like that, it began. The next 3 hours passed in near silence except for the occasional clack of keys and the low hum of encrypted relays bouncing off satellites like whispers in the dark. Sophie sat nearby, coloring quietly with her headphones on. Occasionally, she'd glance up as if sensing something important was unfolding. Noah worked like a surgeon, calm, methodical, and impossibly fast. His fingers danced over lines of code, bypassing digital tripwires with a grace Evelyn had never seen before. He wasn't just accessing the system. He was outsmarting it. And then his voice broke the silence. "Got it." He turned the laptop toward her. Dozens of PDF files loaded on-screen, meeting minutes, altered financial forecasts, emails marked confidential. And they're buried deep within metadata were the geotags and IP logs, enough to connect transactions across subsidiaries and offshore accounts. Evelyn's breath caught. This is more than I hoped for." Noah handed her a flash drive. Encrypted, triple-layered. Once uploaded to the SEC portal, they'll be forced to act. She took it carefully like it was a matchstick in a dry forest. "Noah," she said, voice low, "what if they come after you?" He gave her a look, calm, resolute. "They already did." She swallowed. "And Sophie?" He paused, glancing toward the child napping on the rug, a blanket tucked around her like a cocoon. "That's why we do this right," he said. "Fast, quiet, clean." Evelyn nodded. "Then we need someone to receive this who won't bury it." "I know a name," Noah said. "Agent Keller, SEC Division, Portland. She used to work fraud at the FBI before they buried her in a desk job. She's got a spine and a record of torching entire corporate forests if given a spark." Evelyn stared at him. "You remember that from 5 years ago. I never forget who's still honest," he replied. That night, after the drive had been uploaded through a secure Dropbox to Keller's office, Evelyn cooked for the first time in weeks. Not just heated food she cooked. Roasted squash, sautéed greens, lentil stew from pantry supplies Noah had carefully rationed. Sophie sat at the table, eyes wide. "Miss Snow Princess can cook," she teased. Evelyn laughed, really laughed. "Only when the kingdom's hungry." Noah smiled quietly as he served bowls. It was a strange thing how hope could rise again in such humble places. Not in glass towers or conference rooms, but in candlelight flickering on worn wood in shared meals, in laughter echoing through a cabin buried in snow. Sophie leaned toward Evelyn mid-meal. "Are you going to stay forever?" The question landed with the gentleness of a child and the weight of the world. Evelyn froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Noah looked up but said nothing. She set her spoon down, eyes soft. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But I know this place. Feels more like home than anywhere I've been in a long time." Sophie grinned, satisfied. "Then maybe that's enough for now." Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed and the snow began to fall again in hushed waves, Evelyn found Noah outside on the porch, staring up at the moon. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stepped beside him. "I sent the SEC a message," she said. "Told them there's more if they want it, and that I'll go public if they stall." He nodded. "Smart." She looked up at him. "You're not just smart, Noah. You're brave. You risked everything for truth, for your daughter, for people who didn't deserve your silence. I didn't do it for them." He turned his gaze, searching hers. "I did it for the one person who looked me in the eye and didn't flinch." She was quiet for a long beat. And then, softly, I flinched. I just looked away. Noah smiled. "But you came back." The wind shifted slightly, and she took a step closer. "I spent years surrounded by voices telling me what to do, who to trust, how to lead," she said. "But none of them would have done what you just did. Not one." He held her gaze. "That's because they build empires. I rebuild what gets left behind." And in the cold hush of that night, with the empire already beginning to quake behind them, Evelyn reached for his hand, not as a CEO, not as someone seeking protection, but as a woman who for the first time in years was choosing the quiet kind of strong. Noah didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sometimes rebuilding starts with nothing more than two hands, one truth, and the courage to rise together. They say the boardroom is colder than any blizzard. Today, Evelyn walked in determined to be the fire. The marble floor of Virion Corporation's top level echoed under her heels as she stepped off the elevator. Gone were the silk suits and flawless makeup. Today, she wore a simple black blazer, no jewelry, and a soft gray blouse that matched the sky outside, but it was the fire in her eyes that made people stare. Gasps followed her down the hallway. A few employees whispered. Some looked away, ashamed. She didn't stop. Inside the boardroom, the full panel had already assembled 12 members in tailored arrogance. Media crews hovered outside the glass, ready to report on what many assumed would be her desperate attempt at redemption. No one expected her to leave the room with anything but humiliation, least of all Bradley Voss, the COO. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed smugly. "Evelyn." "We weren't expecting a guest speaker today." She met his eyes with steady calm. "And yet, I'm exactly where I need to be." Chairman Reginald Bain cleared his throat. "Let's be civil. Miss Wren, this is a shareholder quarterly. Unless you've been reinstated by I'm here under federal protection," she cut in. "SEC oversight. Every word in this room is being recorded and relayed." A ripple of tension crossed the room. Voss's smirk flickered. She placed a slim folder on the table. Inside is a timeline of internal fraud committed over the last 14 months. Patterns of stock manipulation, shell transactions, offshore laundering. All linked to the names in this room. Gasps. One board member dropped his pen. Bain frowned. "Do you have proof?" Evelyn's voice never wavered. "Not just proof. The architecture of the fraud. Metadata, emails, financial trails, and the code used to hide it." She clicked the remote. The screen behind her lit up with projected evidence, time-stamped emails, shell company charts, internal memos marked delete after review. And then one last file. A resignation letter, dated 11 months prior, signed by her. But rewritten words altered subtly. Evelyn turned to the room. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was premeditated. "You erased me to take control, but you forgot one thing." She glanced at the door. He stayed. The doors opened. Noah Beckett walked in wearing dark jeans and a collared jacket. He didn't need a badge or title. The quiet force in his step said enough. A few executives exchanged panicked glances. Voss stood. "This is a violation. He's not authorized." Evelyn raised her hand. "He's the original system architect and the whistleblower. Every file you see here was extracted by him. Legally. And with encryption, your new IT team didn't even detect." Voss laughed nervously. "This is absurd. You expect the board to believe some janitor Noah spoke calm and clear. I expect them to read the code." He plugged in a drive. The screen changed again, showing internal system logs with his credentials dated 5 years ago and admin access before he was locked out by the very people accusing him of misconduct. Then signed letters. From Voss, altering system oversight. SEC agents in suits stepped into the room. One of them, Agent Keller, held up her badge. Bradley Voss. You're under investigation for securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Voss blanched. You can't prove any. We don't need to, Keller said coldly. Your own system did. 2 agents moved forward. Cuffs clicked. Voss sputtered. This is her revenge. You're letting her. Evelyn didn't flinch. Revenge is noisy. Justice is quiet. As they dragged him out, the room sat in stunned silence. Chairman Bain cleared his throat. Miss Wren, what are your intentions? She looked around slowly. My intention was never to return as a queen reclaiming her throne. Her eyes landed on Noah just for a moment. I'm here to rebuild something honest, transparent, and human. Someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the room broke into applause, not the kind that came from duty, but relief, like a storm had passed. That afternoon, as reporters swarmed the building, Evelyn and Noah slipped out the back exit. Snow fell gently on the city sidewalks. Everything felt lighter. They walked in silence until Evelyn finally spoke. You didn't have to come in with me. I know, he replied, but I've spent enough years cleaning floors while cowards dirtied the walls. She stopped. You were the only one who stayed. He turned to her. So were you. Their breath met in the cold air between them, mingling for a moment before drifting away. Evelyn looked down, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a worn wooden spoon, Sophie's, hand-carved, uneven, full of charm. I found this in my coat this morning, she said. I think she snuck it in. Noah smiled softly. She said, it brings luck. Evelyn looked up at him. Her eyes shimmered, but not with tears. With peace. Then, maybe, it's time to stop running. Noah didn't say anything. He just reached out, took the spoon, and held it gently between them. As the snow continued to fall, 2 people who had been erased by the world rewrote their ending. Together. 1 month later. The storm had passed not just in the skies, but in their lives. The snow outside the cabin was softer now, melting into quiet puddles under a shy Oregon sun. Pine needles glistened like tiny mirrors, and birds dared to sing again. Nature, like people, had a way of coming back from silence. Noah stood on the porch toolbox in hand, tightening the final hinge on a new wooden swing. Sophie had begged for it, said it should be where Mommy and Daddy can talk forever. He hadn't corrected her. Not anymore. Inside, the cabin had changed. The once temporary warmth had turned into something permanent. Evelyn had left behind her sleek apartments and marble offices for weathered floorboards and soft corners, not because she had to, but because she finally understood what mattered. A knock sounded at the door, gentle this time. No fear, no desperation. Just a knock. He opened it. Evelyn stood there wearing a thick oatmeal sweater, jeans, and her snow boots, the same boots she'd worn the night she collapsed here. But this time, her eyes weren't hollow. They were lit from within. Hey, she said softly. Hey, he replied with a smile that reached every scar he'd ever carried. She stepped inside, brushing a curl from her cheek. She's with your neighbor, right? Mrs. Holloway made cookies. I didn't stand a chance. Noah chuckled. Evelyn laughed a real laugh. She asked me this morning if I was staying for good. And what did you say I told her? It depends. Noah raised an eyebrow. On. She took a deep breath, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Not thick, not corporate, just a few papers inside. I want to rebuild the company, she said. Not the empire, just the part that mattered. The part we started. Noah took the folder, opened it. There, in black ink, was a contract, simple and clean. His name sat under the title, Partner, Co-founder, CTO. His fingers paused at the signature line. "I don't want you to work for me," Evelyn said. "I want to build with you." He looked up slowly. "You sure I'm not used to being sure," she admitted. "But I'm learning that some things don't need certainty. They just need honesty." She stepped closer. "Noah, I don't know what the future looks like, but I know what this feels like, and I'd rather build a world beside you in truth than rule a kingdom alone in fear." Noah didn't respond immediately. He set the folder down. Then he reached into the drawer and pulled out something small wrapped in soft linen. He handed it to her. Evelyn unwrapped it slowly. Inside was the wooden spoon Sophie had made. A little chipped now, still uneven, but in her hands it felt heavier, like it held years, not just wood. He spoke gently. That spoon held more meals, more laughter, more memories than any silver ever did. Evelyn's throat tightened. He continued, voice low, "I kept it, because it reminded me that even broken things can be useful. Even flawed things can feed a soul." She blinked quickly, then placed the spoon carefully on the shelf near the window. "I'm staying," she whispered. "Not just for business, not just for Sophie." Noah met her gaze. Then, for what? She smiled through a softness that shook her shoulders. For hope. Outside, tiny footsteps echoed on the porch. Sophie burst in her cheeks, pink and wild from cold. Daddy Evelyn. "The swing works." Noah opened his arms. She launched into them. Evelyn knelt beside them, brushing snow from Sophie's hair. "Did you save me a cookie?" Evelyn asked. Sophie nodded seriously. "Two, but one's broken." Evelyn laughed. "Perfect. I like broken things. They have more character." Noah chuckled. "That's why she likes me." They all laughed together, wrapped in a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. Later that evening, the three of them sat on the swing Noah had built. Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. Sophie curled between them, half-asleep fingers still sticky from chocolate. The wind rustled gently through the trees. "I used to think power meant control," Evelyn murmured. "But it's really about presence." Noah nodded slowly. "Being there, staying." She turned her face to him. "You stayed." He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted her hand, pressed a kiss to her knuckles, and held it like a quiet promise. No fireworks, no dramatic declarations, just a swing creaking under a slow sunset, a child snoring softly, and two people who had been torn down by the world. Finally, choosing to build something together. Not from marble, but from wood, warmth, and truth. And in that cabin of light, they didn't need to say the words. They had already been spoken in every act of staying. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who hold the quiet strength to catch us when we fall. If this story touched you, if you've ever experienced a moment when someone unexpected showed up and changed your life, or if you have been that person for someone else, I'd love to hear it. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments. Let's see how far this circle of hope reaches. And if stories like this speak to your heart, stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that rebuilds rather than destroys, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all of the good that still exists. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until the next story. May you find kindness waiting at your own door, and may you never walk alone.